One of my favorite foods growing up was biscuits and gravy has always been one of my favorite foods, so of course that was one of the first foods I learned to veganize. Today I'm going to teach you step by step how to make biscuits and gravy. I'm going to teach you how to make a seitan sausage, how to make an amazing gravy, and how to open up a can of refrigerator biscuits and bake those in the oven. So the first thing we're going to make is the seitan sausage, and here are the ingredients you're going to need to do that. Starting out with a tablespoon of sausage seasoning, and I'm just sort of lightly pan roasting it to bring out some of the flavors. Then I'm adding a cup of water. This is going to be the water that I will use to hydrate my seitan. I'm just warming it up so that I can dissolve the better than bouillon. I'm adding a teaspoon of no beef flavor and a teaspoon of no chicken flavor. And I'm combining the beef and chicken to, I guess, sort of approximate a pork flavor. Once the bouillon has dissolved and the sausage flavoring has permeated the water, just put it aside here, and I'm going to add a couple of ice cubes just to bring the temperature down. You don't really want to make seitan with warm liquid, and you see me topping it off there with some cool water just to bring it up to a full cup. Adding just a dash of dark soy sauce, about a teaspoon of maple syrup, stirring that all together. Some chili flake. This is just optional. It adds a little bit of spice. I personally like it, but it's definitely optional. Next, I'm taking a cup of vital wheat gluten, 2 tablespoons of garbanzo bean flour, and 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. These are the dry ingredients, and I'm going to add the liquid ingredients. Again, it's cooled down. You don't want to add any hot liquid to that wheat gluten. I'm also adding a bit of olive oil just to loosen things up, and then I'm stirring all of this together to combine. I'm kind of checking the texture as well. You don't want it to be too dry, you don't want it to be too wet, so kind of test the texture at this point here. It's not quite stiff enough for me to knead it. Still feels a little bit liquidy, so I'm going to add just a bit more gluten to firm up the texture a little bit. Stirring it around, again, just incorporating everything, testing the texture. You want it to be spongy and firm again so that you can knead it. Now, the kneading process takes about 5 minutes. You want it to really firm up. You want it to be tough in your hands. You're looking for a real rubbery texture here. We're going to be running this through a food processor later to break it down into crumbles, but the firm texture here is definitely necessary. You can see that it bounces back when I touch it. And just let it set for a couple of minutes to kind of relax here. I'm going to be baking this seitan as opposed to boiling it. I feel baking it in a tinfoil and parchment paper wrapping really does help to give it a nice firm texture as opposed to boiling it, which can sometimes make it expand more. I'm putting it in this oven here, smart oven at 350 for 1 hour. When it comes out, let it relax and cool for about 15 to 20 minutes before trying to open it. And as you can see now that I'm trying to cut it, it is a really firm, solid texture. So I decided to use a meat grinder attachment to a KitchenAid mixer in order to grind this up into crumbles. So I cut it up into cubes that would fit into the meat grinder attachment. See, I'm pushing it down, and on the other side we get these perfect sausage crumbles. I'm using the large die setting, and it's going at about medium speed. If you didn't have a meat grinder attachment to a KitchenAid, you can definitely use a food processor. Cut it up into the same size chunks as you saw me cutting it into, and just pulse it a few times and you'll get a similar texture. Now is a good time to start preheating your oven so that you can cook your biscuits. There's a number of brands of refrigerator biscuits that you could buy that are vegan. Just go ahead and read your labels. Next, you want to heat up a cast iron pan or any type of non-stick pan and add a little bit of oil so that you can saute your sausage crumbles. Add those in there, and I'm only using about half the batch here with this. And you can use the other half to make sandwiches. Any other type of breakfast sandwiches are great with that sausage. For the gravy here, I'm going to be adding a little bit more of the sausage seasoning just to spice that up. I'm also going to be adding some garlic powder, some paprika, and some onion powder as well. Again, just to enhance the flavor of the gravy. I'm gonna cook these sausage crumbles down until they reduce a little bit, reduce some of that moisture out of them, and until they brown. As you can see, the color right now isn't too dark, but as it cooks, it will darken up quite a bit and look a little bit more like sausage. And because I use this meat grinder attachment, it actually ground up the crumbles a little bit smaller than I would have liked. If you use a food processor, you're a little bit more in control of the size of the crumbles. So I'm gonna take about half of these crumbles out and put them into a bowl. These I will use later to sprinkle on the top, or if I don't feel like the gravy's sausagey enough, I can add those as well. I'm adding just about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and to that I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of flour. Basically need a tablespoon of oil and a tablespoon of flour to thicken a cup of milk. So I'm gonna be making about a 2-cup gravy here. So I'm starting out with 1 cup of soy milk, and I prefer to use soy milk when I make gravies. It just has a little bit of a thicker consistency. So I start out by adding 1 cup of soy milk, and I stir vigorously to incorporate all of the flour and the oil into that milk. Once it's thickened up enough, I use the 2nd cup of milk to dilute it a little bit. It's going to be simmering here for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Again, if it's too thin, you can reduce it a bit more, and if it's too thick, just add a bit more soy milk or any plant-based milk of your choice. I added another bit of nutritional yeast to the gravy and some black pepper just to enhance the flavor. Nutritional yeast adds a certain depth. Not too much of a cheesy flavor in this, but just the depth that gives it a stronger umami. And as you can see, I'm adding a bit more milk there just to thin it out. And so just let it simmer until your biscuits are done. Of course, taste it along the way, see if it has enough salt. Add more seasoning if necessary. If you want more of a sausage flavor, add more sausage seasoning or more black pepper or paprika. Remove your biscuits from the oven once they're perfectly golden brown. And it's time to assemble. I prefer to split my biscuits with a fork, that way you get some crags that hold on to the gravy when you pour it over. I've got this sweet little ladle that I use to pour the gravy over. You can see the chunks of sausage within the gravy. Again, if you wanted it a little bit more sausagey, you could add more crumbles inside, but I prefer to sprinkle some of the crispy crumbles on the top just to give it a bit more texture. Once it's in the gravy, it becomes a little bit more of a consistent texture. All right, well, let's give it a taste. Took a while to make, but it's definitely worth it. Normally I would make my own biscuits, but using these store-bought ones is definitely a shortcut that makes putting this on your table a lot easier. One thing I might even suggest too, if you didn't want to go through all the stress of making the seitan and grinding it and doing all that, you could make the gravy all by itself, just adding the sausage seasoning to it. You get a similar flavor, not as much texture, but it definitely would sell you on that biscuit and gravy idea that you grew up with. It's like the more I eat, the better it gets.